Welcome into this week's episode of Your Drone Questions Answered, brought to you by Drone Launch Academy. I'm your host, Chris Breedlove. Today, our question is this: how can drones be used to really benefit or help with bridge inspection? So, to help me tackle that question, I'm really excited to welcome, and I forgot to clarify this, it's Doctor, right? Dr. Joe Burgett from
It
Clemson
is, but Joe's
University.
just fine.
Well, Joe, thanks for joining the show. And yeah, just tell our listeners a little about yourself, what you're doing at Clemson, and your background and your whole, I guess, journey in the drone space.
Well, first, Chris, thanks for having me on. This is great. As you said, my name is Joe Burgett. I work for Clemson University in South Carolina. In another life, I was a general contractor, and I left that space and finished up my education at the University of Florida. And now I teach at Clemson University in our construction science and management department. So our students will go off and follow a career that really was very similar to what I did when I got out of school. They go off and go build big buildings, whether it be big condos or courthouses or biomedical or, retail, whatever it happens to be, large commercial work. But when you work for Clemson University, we're an R1 institution. So we do a lot of research too. And my area of research is all in the applied drone technology space. I do a lot of, well, I don't do any coding. I don't build drones. It is all like, how do I use commercially off the shelf technology and put it in the hands of either government agencies or private companies so they can do their jobs better, faster, safer, cheaper. All of the values, which I know I don't have to preach to this audience here, that drones can provide. But we do research, and I think we'll talk through about this when we talk about bridges, but I work a lot with the SCDOTs and DOTs across the country just to kind of help them with their drone programs, either stand them up or to, just kind of continue on the training front.
That's awesome. So, bridge inspection, what's the state of play or the problem or the challenge, I guess, around bridges and why they need to be inspected in South Carolina or maybe even across the United States, if you want to go
Sure.
there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a federal mandate that bridges are inspected. So it's, which I think we can all agree that that's something we want. They're safe, but they're safe for a reason because, people inspect them. And when they find things that aren't right, they're fixed. So I think we can all agree on the value there, but not every inspection is the same, so, they're on cycles. They have something called a routine inspection. And this is, more than just like a drive by. It's one where you can go up and kind of look and just, have someone spend some time looking around, see if there's any kind of glaring issues. Those routine inspections are really helpful or are great use cases for drones. But then you have more detailed inspections where you literally have to have somebody climb up there and grab a hammer and bang on concrete and see if it's spalling or if something's rusted a little bit. I mean, a little bit of spalling, a little bit of rust, that's normal. That's not something that's worth spending a whole lot of money to quote unquote fix if it's not really broke. But you'd have to go out there and clear up rust and you actually have to get there. Those are less, you can't really use a drone for that. I haven't seen a drone that's got a hammer attached to it that you can knock on wood or whatnot. They are even in that use case, they're helpful in identifying where the areas that the inspectors should spend their time. So initial reconnaissance. If you're also doing, things like monitoring, like you might have a crack and there's three truths with concrete. It's gray, it's hard, and it cracks. And those are the three truths about concrete. So they're going to crack and that's normal. And that doesn't mean anything is deficient, but you want to keep an eye on it year over year and see, well, is that crack just a shrinkage crack or man, that thing's getting bigger by an eighth of an inch every year. And drones are a great way to kind of monitor that.
Yeah. So, what's the value of the drone? Is it the repeatability? Is it the keeping the inspectors out of right of ways? Like, what are the other
Right.
virtues, I
Yeah.
guess, of using a drone for these sorts of tasks?
That's a great question. And I'll start off with a high level and then I'll drill down. So the benefit is huge and it's obvious by just kind of knowing that like every state uses drones. All right. They may not, they're different levels and different states have different levels of sophistication of their program. It's just widely accepted that there's a lot of value. That's the proof case. But now, like, why? All right. So a few things. One, you have to kind of think through like how one actually does the inspection, investigate the deck, what they call the part that we drive over. And sometimes what happens is you have delamination where the concrete kind of separates apart and then if not taken care of, turns into potholes, all those kind of things. How does one find that? Okay. Well, there's some pretty low tech ways in which you like drag a chain and then you listen to it. Okay. But think of where the inspector is when you're doing that traffic zooming by and you're dragging a chain, well, that's not safe. One of the big advantages of drones is it allows you to do some of those activities from a safe place. So you're not interrupting, you're not putting the inspectors in harm's way. But then you also got to think a lot of the inspection happens underneath the bridge. So, if it's a small little bridge over a little creek or whatever, then you just get a ladder and the inspector walks underneath it and there you go. But if it's a bigger bridge, you'll need what's called a snooper truck. And you probably have seen it if you didn't know what it was, but it's a truck that's got this articulating arm and a bucket in it, and it like wraps underneath the bridge to be able to, so the inspector can look at it. So there's a few things. One, if you've ever been in one of those buckets, it is the most wild carnival ride ever because bridges move. Like you don't really realize it when you're driving on it, but bridges go up and down. And if you're cantilevered out over this articulating arm, you are literally going up and down, not just inches, but like a foot or two sometimes, especially if a big load goes by. So they're dangerous from that point of view. And then also that snooper truck is taking up a lane of traffic at most, at least one. And you're going to have the crash cars that are behind it. So again, for safety reasons and all that kind of stuff. So which creates a visual distraction. So even if you have like a two-lane highway and one of the lanes is still open, it's something interesting, right? And you got a lot of folks that have the rubbernecking and want to look at what's going on and all those kind of good things. So it's just it's an inconvenience to the traveling public. Now, if you introduce drones, a lot of that can be done completely invisible to the traveling public. So it's safer for the bridge inspectors. It's more convenient for the traveling public. In a lot of ways, the documentation that you can get is just much better. Yes, I mean, if you're in the bucket truck, you can have a camera and you can get right up in there and take pictures. But, it's one person and a camera. Whereas if you've got a drone, especially one of the like autonomous drones that are like flying all the way around, I'm thinking Skydio right now, they're capturing hundreds, if not thousands of pictures to create a digital twin of it. And that's just not something that you can reasonably replicate with a person in a bucket truck underneath the bridge.
Yep. No, understood. I guess is the end game in a lot of situations maybe a more simple, like, hey, we just laid our eyeballs on it through the lens of the camera on the drone and we took the pictures we needed to take, and then we'll take the same ones again and monitor that crack? Or is it more about getting to that more sophisticated, complete digital twin? Or maybe it's both. I don't know, but what really
Yeah.
matters the most?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll do the best I can. So where we're going for a digital twin, we're getting there. I would definitely say the majority of states are not documenting their bridges to that level yet, but that is definitely the trajectory, and that's going to happen. And that's on the flight path. It's just a matter of how, when, and available funds to make that transition, all that kind of stuff. I do want to go back to aircrafts here in a minute, like other things that can be done, but I do kind of want to, double click and hang a lantern on why those digital twins are so valuable. One, I mentioned before that if you see a crack and you're taking a picture of it and it's in your notes and you're going to be monitoring that year after year, there's value. And we're doing that now where, there's something that flagged the inspector's notice and this person's literally either writing it down on their notepad or they've got a digital, version of that. And then they make a note to themselves to check them in the year. That's fine, but it's a little bit laborsome to do that. And the inspector needs to have been bubbled up to their attention. That's something they need to look at. Whereas, in the future, and a little bit to this degree that's happening now, but again, which will be much more robust and more common in the future, is when the drone just, flies autonomously, creates this digital twin, then you have a record of the cracks you don't know about. So one that might have been missed in an inspection 1 year, and you pick it up again in 4 years or whenever the next inspection is, it's like, oh wow, that's something I didn't even see before. And it might be significant because it's grown over the past 4 years, or it's not significant because we just missed it. We just didn't see it last time because something was over it, some leaves were over a tree or whatever, and we didn't know. But now we do, and we can track it. But then another benefit is if you see something, now it's really easy to share it to maybe like the senior engineer. Hey, we see this. Maybe it's an issue we don't really know. Let me bump this up. And now you got a digital twin that we can send to someone who's maybe more knowledgeable about it that can weigh in on it. That was kind of a long answer to one part of it, but you kind of talked about like other types of drones right now. And there's a couple of different schools of thought in terms of like what drones are being used. And I don't know which one I necessarily, buy into, but one school of thought is you make the investment. And I'm thinking, an M30, an M350, something in the 30, 40 plus $1,000 range that's got a really powerful zoom and you can do a lot of great inspections way far away and your aircraft's not in any kind of danger at all of collision. Because I will say flying under bridges is tough. You lose GPS, so you're flying, in ATI mode. The wind is weird. Even on low wind days, it gets funneled. So you really it's tough on that. There's wildlife that you wouldn't think of, but birds and bats are big ones, and fishing line. Fishing line's like my nemesis. It's hard to see. Nothing will take a drone down faster than getting tangled up in fishing line. So, anyways, if you've got one of these more expensive drone, but you're able to kind of stay away from those harm's way, that's one school of thought. Then on the other school of thought, it's like $30,000 is an awful lot of money. I could buy 15 $2,000 drones. And I don't want to necessarily call them disposable drones, but if you've got a $1,500 or $1,000, whatever it happens to be, you can buy a lot of those for $30,000, and you can fly them close and you can put prop guards on them and you can kind of extend some of the life out of it, that sort of thing. The answer to that question is probably, it depends on what your scenario is, because you don't want to crash even a quote unquote disposable drones over a body of water, because you're not getting it back. And now you got a lithium ion battery, in the public waterway. And I don't know what that does over however many months or years. And I don't want to be drinking out of it, that kind of thing. It depends. But certainly our inspectors have tools at their disposal.
Yeah. Is the payoff like getting a more expensive enterprise level solution that can do even maybe an autonomous inspection, like, hey, orbit around this location with without GNSS? Is that like critical? Maybe I'm just thinking if it's like a much larger, like interstate bridge versus some smaller, like, or if with the right piloting ability, maybe it doesn't matter. Get in ADI mode and just kind of take care of it yourself. Well, what is your, I guess, thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, again, it's gonna depend a lot. I'll kind of make a statement of a couple of facts here. One, I don't think drones will ever be quote unquote critical, because we've been inspecting bridges for literally hundreds of years, right? So we've been able to do it. Now, is that the most efficient? I mean, we built the pyramids without, backhoes and forklifts and those kind of things. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend doing that now. Is a backhoe critical to build a big building? It's kind of in the same vein. We can inspect any bridge with manpower and existing and traditional techniques. Now that goes into that. Okay, well, that's fine. The next fact is, do drones make it more cost effective? And the answer is yes. I mean, astounding yes. Every single bridge, well, no. I mean, there are some bridges that literally, are well maintained. They're in a riverbed, and you just walk them. This is easy. I mean, it's easy. It wouldn't be worth getting your drone out of your truck to assist with those. So it's not true. I mean, every situation is dependent. But if we're talking globally, here at South Carolina, we put a drone. We're divided into 7 districts. Every district bridge inspection team has a drone, and they were trained on it. So as they are going around in their best judgment, hey, what's the best way for me to do this inspection? Is it getting a ladder? Is it getting a canoe? Is it leasing the boat to come in? Is it a snooper truck, or is it a drone? They get to make that. Now they got another tool in their toolbox, and they make that call. And when they make that call, it's the experts boots on the ground making that decision. It's definitely better. I mean, even if you cast aside the safety piece, which is huge, right? Unfortunately, there are a lot of fatalities with state DOTs, and this is an easy way of getting those folks out of harm's way. But moreover than that, so again, that's a huge piece, but even moreover than that, it's just faster. And snooper trucks I was talking about before, they're expensive. I mean, you could easily spend $1,500 on that for a day rental. You can almost buy, depends on the drone. You could maybe buy a small drone for that. And then once you own the drone, you can do that all the time, right? So as I mentioned, the traveling public, it's hard to put a monetary value on basically a forced or a man-made traffic jam because of maintenance. It's hard to put a dollar value on that. But I think anyone who's been stuck in a traffic jam appreciates that there is value to not having to be in that, right? So sometimes the ROI is easy to calculate by, again, not having snooper trucks, reduced manpower for collision avoidance, all that kind of stuff. Those are easy. And I did a paper a while back where we did a pilot study, and it came back, I think, $1,500 a day is what we saved when we used drones for bridges that we were using drones. But again, that did not include convenience to the public, safety factors, and all that kind of stuff. So by evidence of every state doing it, it's pretty obvious that this is good tech.
What has the learning curve been for some of the bridge inspectors, I guess, you've worked with? How do they develop these skills in a way that made sense and wasn't
Yeah.
overly overwhelming?
Yeah. And I would say the majority of them were bridge inspectors, and they had never flown before. So what we did to stand up the SCDOT's bridge inspection team is we started off. I mean, they didn't have Part 107 licenses, so we did some training, remotely for them to get everybody up to speed with Part 107. And then again, we had some grant money came in, so we paid for their licenses, and that was kind of like, but we used a little bit of that as a kind of like a weed out because, we can provide the training, but obviously, you got to study, you got to put the time in. And that was a way for us to make sure these bridge inspectors were committed. If they were willing to study for this and get their Part 107, that was kind of like okay, you're committed, you've got it. We'll help you the rest of the way. And then we kind of continued that training. We use an online simulator, and it's not a perfect representation of the real world, but it teaches thumb skills so that, they can kind of just know. I can always tell when I'm doing like in-person training, how much stick time they have when I ask them to go forward and the drone goes up. And it's because they use the wrong hand, right? We use a simulator kind of to teach that. Plus, a few years or so ago, we got a grant from Federal Highways to actually build a bridge inspection model. So we did use that a little bit, where they're going around finding cracks in a bridge. Just because we have that in our toolbox, we use that to kind of, again, teach thumb skills. And what we did is we brought them to Clemson's campus and we did a boot camp where it was over, a few days, where the bulk of it was flying and then mission planning and just kind of using those regulatory compliance tools. So get your Part 107, you got to check airspace. Well, that's all well and good, but Part 107, they give you a chart. Well, in the real world, you don't get a chart. It's like, okay, we got a airport was about a mile away from here. What airspace are we in? And they, we kind of go through the skills. We use the loft for that training where they can go in and they can see if there's TFRs, that kind of stuff. There's some weather tools that we use, but the mission planning, it's like, okay, for us, what's important is we try to do the mission planning before we leave the office when it's nice and air conditioned and that kind of thing. So we go to Google Maps and we say, and we did this. We said, okay, we're going to inspect these 4 bridges that were near Clemson. And it's okay, bring them up and let's look at them. What are the risks? Where do you, if something bad were to happen, what would it likely be? There's power lines and, they were able to probably pick out maybe 90% of the risks that were there. But then we would go actually out there and fly to do kind of mock inspections. For one example, one of the bridges, there was a 5-year-old birthday party there where we were planning on taking off. Well, that wasn't on Google Maps. So we had to adjust our plan and all those kind of different things. So we did some of the training there. But that was kind of the mission planning stuff. We used the NIST, which is a bucket, a row of bucket stands, that sort of thing. But there's no substitute for just practice. Flying a drone is a skill, and like any other skill, it requires practice. And when they left our training program that we had set up for the SCDOT, it's not binary where you're trained, you're not trained. It's on a spectrum where some people have some skills and are probably okay taking some pictures far away. Other people might be okay under a bridge, but big bridges where, you got lots of reactionary time. Other people who practice on their own might be more comfortable flying near girders and things like that in GPS denied environments. So it's kind of a long answer, but it's not you take this training and check, you're good to do everything. It's you take this training and then you start practicing on your own and you develop the skills and you do missions that you're comfortable and your skills will support.
Yeah. Maybe the last thing I'll go to, Joe, I don't know if there's a whole lot to this, but I can't imagine someone who's not a bridge inspector is probably, I wouldn't think, particularly helpful. Although I guess they could model the bridge, but like if there is someone who said, man, I really do like flying my drone, I've really got the skills from a piloting perspective. Do you see an on ramp for someone like that from, I guess, a vocational thing to say, hey,
Yeah.
maybe I should go work on my skills or get in with the DOT or whatever the case may be. Could I be an asset? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to kind of think through on that. So I will mention this. If you're talking about like DOT inspectors themselves inspecting bridges, then yeah, for the most part, and what I have seen is that they're not going to necessarily farm that out to like, well, there's someone over here that knows how to fly drones, but they don't know anything about bridges. So have them come out here and fly next to an inspector. That happens, but that's a little bit of a harder sell. So that's one point I'll bring up. The other point I'll bring up is DOTs across the country farm out a lot of their inspections to consultants. So that same consultant that might be inspecting power lines one day is inspecting bridges the next day in terms of companies. So that company who might do a lot of volume in terms of drone work, drone inspection work, then that company, there might be some meat on that bone to be a full-time pilot with those skills and then kind of are trained, in that space. Utilities are different than bridges. I can tell you that Duke Energy here in South Carolina, they employ a boatload of 1099 drone pilots. Now there is a training program where They're not engineers, but they do kind of go through a training program that here's what you would look for and let us know about it so that an inspector can look at it. That model doesn't translate as well into bridges just because there's just so many, it's harder. Power lines they're more similar than bridges. There's a lot of different types of bridges and deficiencies look differently. But then the third point I'll make up is the model that we use here in South Carolina, where the bridge inspectors have their own drone and they're kind of their own team. It's kind of more of a decentralized model. Not every state DOT does that. There are other DOTs. In my mind, I'm thinking Alabama, who has an outstanding program. Oregon has a great program. They have a more centralized model where they have a UAS leader and they have a few pilots around them. And then they are the drone service provider for their DOT. If a bridge needs a drone, then they just call them and then then they manage it in-house. So there's a few models that are out there. So that's the details. Zooming back out at 1,000 foot, I would say there's a little bit of meat on that bone, but it wouldn't be the first place I would direct a freelance drone pilot to go after.
Yeah. Well, Joe, to kind of wrap this up, thank you so much for jumping on. It's really, really fun topic. Folks who want to know more about you and your work at Clemson, what's the best way for them to look you up or get a hold of you or things of that nature?
I mean, I'm happy to provide my email address in the show notes. And then, again, I'm at Clemson University. So if you Google Joe Burgett, Clemson University, I'll pop up. I'm happy to answer questions on that. I also been involved in a group, called SkyDuck. SkyDuck's an acronym for the South Carolina Interagency Drone Users Consortium. Well, it's a mouthful, I know, but it's a nonprofit association exclusive to government agencies in South Carolina. So that's kind of my area of service to support my state and their use of drone tech. So skyduck.org is their website. And again, if you're a government agency, especially if you're in South Carolina, but otherwise, happy to talk with you about that organization and how you might be able to create something like that in your home state.
Awesome. And we'll drop the Skyduck link as well in the show notes. Well, Joe, again, thanks so much for joining today. Really fun conversation. And for our listeners, whatever question you might want us to tackle in the future, please drop me an email at chris@dronelaunchacademy.com, drop it in the Drone Launch Connect community, or visit ydqa.io. Until next time, have a great week.